Good afternoon, and thank you all for attending today's webinar on generative AI, providing clarity amongst confusion. I expect this will be a great topic. We've certainly heard a lot about generative AI in the last 8 to 10 months. So I really look forward to the discussion. But before I start, I'd like to just tell you a little bit about our association so that everybody knows what we do. So the Canadian RegTech Association is a not-for-profit, and we focus on bringing key stakeholders together in the financial service sector to talk about key challenges and look for practical solutions on how to solve those challenges. We've been operating since 2019. And we've also been working on the subject of AI and machine learning since 2019. So I want to show you on the next slide our program timeline for AI. So we've done a number of sessions like this today, webinars, podcasts on the subjects here in Montreal and in Toronto and our annual events. We've also published 2 white papers. And the key takeaway on our white papers is we bring actually our members in as contributors to our white papers, and they bring in their insights and their views and their approaches. So we've done 2 papers. Both of them are focused on AI risks. We were, as an association, we worked together to respond to OSFI's consultation, their green paper, Developing Financial Sector Resilience in the Digital Age. And we've also run a number of roundtables, and these roundtables are exclusive to our members where we talk specifically about key themes. And we've done 3 on AI, and we've done others on derivatives and wealth management and other topics. So this is a subject I just wanted to emphasize that there's something that is part of our organization, and it's something that we expect to be a key theme going forward. The other topic I wanted to bring up is the work that we did with the Digital Governance Council. On the next slide. So the Digital Governance Council and the CRTA worked together at the end of last year and the beginning of this year to put together what's called a workshop agreement, and it's the first phase before a formal voluntary standard is put in place. And this baseline requirements were for vendors offering AI and ML solutions to financial institutions. Essentially what it does is it provides transparency on the risk and governance structure that vendor solutions will need to have in place in order to secure a contract with a financial institutions. There's a shared responsibility in terms of third-party risk, and this workshop agreement is one step to provide that transparency and shared understanding. We are working towards doing a follow-up with the Digital Governance Council of Canada on particularly digging a little bit deeper into how this relationship would practically take place. The final thing I wanted to mention on AI and machine learning is an offer that we do have for members. INQ Law, which is one of our members, has kindly offered a discount to 2 of their programs. One is on Privacy Ready, and one is on AI maturity assessment. And these are programs that are fairly extensive, that dig into, they're effectively to help on training organizations to be fully versed in these 2 areas. And Carole will mention a little bit more about that shortly. But let's dig into this topic. So generative AI is certainly something we've been hearing a lot about. It's captured the public attention, I think mainly because of its accessibility, the accessibility of the solution. There's been a lot of talk about the potential productivity gains, the innovation potential, But there's also been a lot of discussion about the risks involved with generative AI and things. And so today, really, we're going to be digging into that more deeply. And what are some of those risks to financial institutions? What does a financial institution need to think about in terms of their governance and risk frameworks? What tools are available? So without any further delay, let me introduce you to our panel. So today we have three representatives from member firms of the CRTA. So Carole Piovesan, who is founder of I&Q Law, Shawn Tumanov, Director of Data and Analytics and Governance at BMO, and John Weigelt, National Technology Lead at Microsoft Canada. And all three of them will provide a short introduction before we start today's panel. But before we dig into the panel, I wanted to just level set a little bit in terms of definitions. This is an area that, as an association, we talk a lot about. The lack of consistency in definitions across regulators, across jurisdictions, and how important it is to have that common understanding. So these particular definitions are from a US regulator, the federal regulator for AI and copyright law. And the AI, artificial intelligence, is defined as a general classification of automated systems to define performance tasks typically associated with human intelligence or cognitive functions. Generally, AI technologies may use different techniques to accomplish subtasks. This notice uses the term AI in a more limited sense to refer to technologies that employ machine learning. So machine learning being a subset of artificial intelligence. So an AI model, a combination of computer code and numeric values. An AI system, a subject, a product, or service that substantially incorporates one or more AI models and is designed for use by an end user. So it's a system versus an individual model. And generative AI, an application of AI used to generate outputs in the form of expressive material, so text, images, audio, content. And generative AI may take commands or instructions from human users, which are sometimes called prompts. Examples of this are Midjourney, OpenAI, ChatGPT, Google Bard, and Microsoft. So I don't know if before we're going to go into introductions here, but before we jump into that, does anybody have any other, the panelists have any comments on these definitions or just the importance of definitions?
I would say that these definitions keep changing, and depending on the regulator you ask or the country, they might have slight variations, but in general, the main concepts are quite similar between different regulatory agencies.
Okay, great. Thank you. So let's get into the session, and let's open it up by each of you giving a brief introduction of yourselves. Also, if you're looking for the full bios, they can be found on our website where all the bios are there for you to read. So Carole, can you just start off briefly and maybe give an introduction and also just a little discussion point and clarity on the two training programs?
For sure. Thank you. And really appreciate the opportunity to attend this webinar and share some thoughts on the wild and wacky world of generative AI and its governance. Carole Piovesan, partner and co-founder at Inc. Law, also principal at Inc. Consulting. In my legal capacity, my legal practice focuses on privacy, cyber incident response, and all aspects around sort of AI liability as it starts to bubble to the surface. In my consulting capacity, I do a lot of work setting up privacy management programs, supporting cyber ready programs, but also really where my focus is on AI governance programs, and increasingly taking that maturity. So to reference the AI Ready program, it's that maturity assessment to see, what are some of the data ambitions of an organization? What are the existing structures you have in place as an organization from a data governance and data management perspective? And then how do we bridge the gap between those ambitions and existing infrastructure to fill in gaps towards AI governance? So don't duplicate, don't rebuild, take what you've got and go from there. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Carole. John.
Hi, everyone. John Weigelt, Chief Technology Officer here at Microsoft Canada. I think to start off the conversation, need to remember that AI has been around for many, many years, despite the explosion over the last 6 months. And I call it the Kleenexification of AI, with boards of directors and senior leaders all asking if ChatGPT is being used within organizations, but really using that as a short form for all types of artificial intelligence. I have the good fortune of helping organizations across Canada put in place automated productivity. And I've been doing so for a better part of 7 years now as the lead of Microsoft Canada's responsible AI team. And so we've helped organizations from retail, financial services, law enforcement, defense, manufacturing, and others put in place strong structures in order to support the governance models that they have to be able to build out these solutions. Generative AI represents this stepwise change in some cases around how these tools are used and the democratization of tools. And so you'll hear later on in this seminar or this webcast, how we see those changes happening in organizations.
Thank you, John. And thank you so much for your continued support with the association. John's been very active with a lot of our activities over the last 5 years. Shawn, turning to you, just give us a brief update on yourself.
Sure. Good morning. I am Shawn Tumanov. I'm the Director of Data Analytics Governance at BMO Financial Group. I do want to provide a little disclosure that my views that I provide today are my views only, and they don't necessarily represent the views, beliefs, or policies of Bank of Montreal. So just please take that into consideration. I've been with the bank for about 12 years. I am responsible for ensuring we have ethical as well as efficient, effective AI development implementation programs. Prior to that, I spent a number of years in model risk, and I used to work for a regulator at one point. Excited to be here.
Thank you. Thanks, Shawn. So let's turn to the questions. So we talked a little bit about, yes, AI has been around, and especially in financial services. So what's changed, right? We've seen this explosion, as John says. So what really has changed for financial services, or has anything changed? Maybe Shawn, we could start with you. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think there's so many use cases with generative AI, with everything being promised from one-stop shop where a customer can just log in and chat with the bots to find their home finance guide and know their interest rate right away, to providing insights into products and services and what kind of funds a customer may invest in. So those are some of the promises that generative AI offers. Now, there's probably a big difference between the promises and the realities of what it can actually do. But it seems like at this point, you hear a lot about some of the risks, considerations, and what generative AI can offer. And a lot of that may still be very early on, and we're still in early phases of developing what exactly we can use the technology for.
Yeah, thank you, Shawn. John, what are you seeing in terms of use cases?
Yeah, we're seeing a variety of use cases appear in the marketplace. I think everywhere from summarization to putting natural language translation in front of traditional databases and being able to get to knowledge faster. So being able to ask your computer a natural language question. How do I do a Z lookup in Excel, and having it do it? Or how do I create this chart? We see those things in place. We also see code development and really streamlining, how people are developing applications, and sometimes up to 25% more efficiency that's there with these generative tools. One of the things that is really enlightening to me is there are also organizations saying, here's where these tools don't fit. And that's an important consideration as well. And so making material decisions that could impact individuals and saying, no, we're not going to use generative AI in those cases, and we'll make sure that there's a human firmly in the loop, so to speak, in order to make those decisions and determinations.
Yeah, it's such a good point, John, because like trust is so fundamental in financial services. So making sure that you think through those use cases and how it impacts potentially your customers is so important. Carole, we're so lucky to have you here today. In terms of regulation, we see quite a lot out there, and it's kind of confusing because there is a lot of existing regulation that actually touches on some of the areas that banks need to be thinking about. Maybe you could just give us, I know we've already talked about this in a full session previously, but maybe you could give us just an overview on some of the things that organizations need to be thinking about in terms of specifically around the AI element of C27 and areas to think about.
Yeah, for sure. So just on your earlier question, in addition to the technological changes that we've seen coming in research and development, starting in 2017 and actually, way before, but certainly with a lot of excitement in the early 2010s and continuing forward, and then obviously with the release of ChatGPT and other generative AI models. We've also seen a really strong conversation around, well, are we okay with this technology? Is there anything we should be worried about when it comes? What's unique about it? Is it just another, word processing system that we can set and forget? Or is there something that is a little more distinct that we have to regulate? And so that conversation has been maturing over the last decade in particular. And in the last, I would say, 8 to 9 months has just snowballed. So where are we today? Today we are in a world in which you have overlapping existing and potential laws that will come to bear on what your AI governance program looks like. And going back to the first slide, definitions absolutely do matter. When I look at definitions, it's funny because I just look to now. I used to always try to piece together a definition that seemed to make sense for me, and now I say, heck, I don't need to worry about it because somebody has put it in a draft law, and at the end of the day, I'm accountable to that. So I'm going to go to that law and see what it says as we evolve our thinking. Not to say that's just my approach, because that's the world that I live in. And so in Canada, we have C27, that is a law that governs the use of a technology, and in particular, the governance of a high impact technology. So while the draft law doesn't define what high impact means precisely, we do have some guidance through a compendium document. And if we look and survey other jurisdictions, we'll understand that what our government is trying to protect against is a technology that can have a profound impact on people's rights and freedoms. So, and I would extend that to environment and property, okay? So what we have in Canada then is existing law that is more sector or specific issue based, that may have an impact on artificial intelligence. And we are waiting for that guidance, E23 guidance, to come out in its adapted form, as well as other guidance specific to the financial services sector. And then you have existing law, such as human rights law, that comes to bear on the impact of particular systems on individuals' rights and freedoms. And then you have this draft law that is saying, well, in our view, it's not good enough because we actually have to regulate the technology itself when a certain trigger is hit, and that's the high impact trigger. So this is true in Canada, and just really quickly, this is a conversation happening in many parts around the world. The EU and the US are hotspots to look to. We also see a lot of regulatory activity bubbling up in various parts of Asia. I'd put my eye on China. I'd put my eye on South Korea. I'd put my eye on Singapore.
Thank you, Carole. In terms of when I think about generative AI, I think of the consumer element to it, like the fact that it's so accessible to more people, and also, but going back to our title here, it is creating some confusion to people because because of clarity on what really is it, how does it impact the consumer. It will our actual legal framework and regulatory framework actually protect that consumer, because we have sort of a patchwork of regulators here, and so how will that message get across to the actual consumer? I started going a bit off piece, but this is something that I keep thinking about, is the protection element.
To a certain extent, I want to go back then to Shawn's point about the definitions, where yes, there are a number of definitions, but if you really look hard, you see sort of a consistency across those definitions. The same is in effect true for the various governance and regulatory approaches that you see coming out. So you have to pay attention to the detail, of course. I mean, that's always the case. But the key themes that are coming out in terms of what needs to be regulated and where attention needs to be placed for various organizations, that is generally consistent. So you can go up to 30,000 feet and say, well, you really have to worry about data, models, outputs. And then you can drill down in each of those pillars to say, well, this is what it means to worry about data, and this is what it means to worry about models, and same for outputs. And then it's really when you get to the sort of ground level where you start to see the differences in potential tweaks to compliance, but we're not there yet. We're actually not at the point where we are differentiating on tweaks to compliance as we are, for instance, in the privacy space, where you can start to look at different jurisdictions and say, well, in Quebec, you'll do this, and in BC, you'll do that, and then in the rest of Canada, barring Alberta, you'll do something separate. But that's not the case yet in AI. So we're still in a world where we can look at, with some degree of generality and with thoughtful multidisciplinary conversations within an organization, and devise a program that gets to the heart of what the law is protecting against, and that is harm to people and property caused by these systems where there is no justification and no accountability.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Carole. And you're actually quite segueing nicely to kind of our next theme, really, on today's discussion is thinking about governance and risk. And one of the things, like when OpenAI came out in November, one of the things that struck me at the time was, gosh, what bad timing, right? Because from all our discussions with our roundtables and everything in the association, I feel like the banks are really getting a really good handle on their governance and risk, and a lot of clarity on how it would be function on a day-to-day basis, and then all of a sudden this comes out, and so Shawn, maybe we could start with you. How are organizations starting to adjust and think about rethink governance and risk in light of generative AI?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm actually participating with the American Banker Association working group as to what are the recommendations coming out of there. I'm also talking to a lot of peer banks. And what I'm seeing right now is there's a lot of hype in the industry, which I think you alluded to before. But most organizations are really in that very early stage of piloting it. Some organizations are really not doing, especially in Canada, not doing much with generative AI until OSFI E23 comes out to get some more insights as to what the regulators expect. So it really kind of varies. But in general, as I think Carole alluded to before, and everyone else actually mentioned that as well, AI has been around for a long time. And sometimes we make it sound like these risks that are coming out are somehow new, unique. And there are some changes. I don't want to sound like there are no changes, but in general, you can apply a lot of times your existing governance practices without creating new frameworks and new hoops to people to jump through. Ultimately, we want to make sure we are operating very ethically, that we understand what these tools do, and we do the right thing for our customers. Now, the other thing we have to consider is that we keep talking about things like explainability and governance, but do we really need explainability for all AI or for all generative AI? we really need to look at the use cases. And I think the use cases play a huge role in here. And I think, John, you also mentioned the fact that not all use cases qualify for generative AI. And that's actually a big component here, because when we talk about generative AI, as I alluded earlier, it's almost like the sky is the limit, but really we should consider what are the right tools that generative AI should be used for, and what are the cases we should not be using generative AI. And then look down from those use cases, and based on those use cases, apply the appropriate level of risk controls and governance. And one of the important things that banks will need to consider, not only ethics, privacy, legal, fair banking, but also intellectual property. The IP discussion is actually a big topic right now. There is a request for information, a request for proposal in the US from a copyright office in terms of what are the particular implications from using generative AI with intellectual property, which can actually reduce or potentially lessen which may create some hurdles for banks to pass through. So there is limitations on how intellectual property could be used, and if generative AI is built based off scraping up multiple websites, that can prevent some usage of generative AI. But some of that is still pending with the regulators and with parliaments and Congress of various government agencies, because it's a really wide topic to discuss, and I'm sure there's something that we'll learn over the next few years.
Yeah, thanks, Shawn. When I kind of go back to that timing question, we had the NIST framework come out, which we were waiting for on risk, that came out in January, right after kind of OpenAI launched. What's the view on NIST and other frameworks? Is it a good starting point that organizations should be thinking about? When I'm referring to the NIST AI risk framework that came out in January.
I'll jump in there. I think I'm seeing a lot of Canadian organizations look to the NIST risk management framework. If you look through the iterations, it leans heavily on OECD work that is now appearing in other places like the G7 Hiroshima Accords and things like that. So we see this very close alignment. The risk management framework also does this brilliant job of describing all the different actors that are now involved with the AI. I call it the pipeline, but the whole framework. And that's one of the biggest changes we see happening with the governance models. In the past, AI had almost been done by the wizards in the back room, the data scientists creating these great scorecards and dashboards, and then popping that out to their own organizations. And now we see the community expanding a great deal. And so there's model developers, there will be model tuners and trainers, prompt engineers. The marketing and HR people are getting involved with tuning these systems and tools so that they are producing the right tone for their constituents. And so you want to have a formal tone, perhaps if you're a financial services organization, perhaps a more playful tone if you're a gaming company or something of the sort. And so you have a much broader team that's involved. And so we see that governance model evolving from these different groups as new technologies that come out that accompany AI. Think of tools like differential privacy or confidential compute. Organizations are now really experimenting with new ways to look at their whole data estate as they do their digital transformation. And so being able to reason over encrypted data is really unlocking great value within organizations. And so in some cases, we see then the data governance moving to the chief operating officer instead of their chief risk officer. And so saying, look, we're going to catalyze our business using data, and then we're going to put in place the appropriate safeguards. All of this is happening as people are learning and getting nudged into these new models, right? And I think that's one of the important things. We started right off with definitions. We need to then understand what's actually happening behind the scenes. There are some misperceptions out there that these tools are actually almost cutting and pasting from the existing web. And they're not doing that. They're actually just training on existing materials and creating new material every time. That's why they're generative. So every time that you ask it a prompt, it's creating that from scratch. It's not a cut and paste or anything of the sort. And so it's been really interesting to watch the debate over, hey, when this generates something new, what is the permissions that had to be granted to train this beforehand? And some using examples of, perhaps you're a musician and you're looking over old tables of music and writing down and copying those tables to train yourself. When you create your new symphony, you know, you've learned and you've trained off these old ones by not violating copyright, but by just simply doing that education. Are there some similarities there? I think we're all watching very closely to see how that plays out as these tools are being used.
So can I just clarify one thing? Oh, go ahead, Shawn.
I just want to mention one thing. So regarding NIST specifically, right? I think NIST is a great framework and great foundation. NIST is not, banks are not required to follow NIST. Some of the NIST items do at times get incorporated into bank regulations, and the US regulators do review NIST, but on just like NIST on its own is not something banks need to incorporate today. Are there great insights from NIST? For sure, there are great insights from NIST. But for example, in the US so far, the Comptroller of the Currency came out and said that they believe, at least at this time, the existing regulations, specifically they bring up model risk management, are sufficient for majority of AI models or AI use cases. They are, as all regulators are looking to change the frameworks, and the US regulators signaled that they are looking into that as well. They will probably leverage some things of NIST, but I wouldn't say like you need to adapt all the NIST practices today.
Can I add to that too, Donna? Because I think it's an important point, and having spoken quite a bit with the folks at NIST that developed this framework, you know, the framework is intended to be voluntary and suggestive, illustrative. So it's not intended to be a plug and play where you take all the different objectives and the criteria and you plug them into your organization and it should run smoothly. No, you're supposed to read it, and with, you know, a sense of sort of critical thinking, you would apply what makes sense to your organization. But I really just want to touch on that, make that point now in connection with Shawn's point about model risk management. So the thing that is changing with respect to AI that we have to be much more alive to as governance specialists is that it is not just about the governance of the model. You are taking AI and you are applying it in a socio-technical context, which is what NIST's framework does. And if you step back and you read the EU Artificial Intelligence Act, and you read the Digital Charter Implementation Act, Part 3, which is the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, and you read the different regulatory guidance, that's what it's getting at, which is, do you understand how your technology will be used in the context, in the use case, to use Shawn's words? Do you understand that, and have you thought through the implications of that? If the implications, the risks, the potential impacts on individuals and their property and environment are low, then you don't need much governance at all. If you're in a high impact environment, and the EU AI Act tries to be much more prescriptive about what that means, financial services like en masse sort of falls within that, but not necessarily all aspects of it, then you are in a world where you have different governance streams that you have to apply, and model risk is only one, right? You also have to assess your data for potential bias and quality. You also have to have ongoing controls and ongoing monitoring of those high risk systems to ensure that there's no data drift, there's no unintended consequences, you understand that they're being used as intended, and you can sort of continue to use it in a way that is responsible. So that's just the key differentiator that I wanted to highlight.
Yeah, that's a great point. And also a few other things that you're mentioning here, because like AI has been around for ages, right? And like all the financial services have incorporated already into their risk management programs, enterprise risk. And so yeah, maybe things need to be adjusted a little bit, but rethought on, but the frameworks are there, like, and they have been for a long time. And the other thing that I keep thinking about is complex AI has been implemented in the financial institutions, like financial crime oversight or a trade surveillance. These are not simple programs. They are complex risk oversight programs that take a lot of due diligence, right? So that due diligence is already embedded in organizations. So I understand the human element is the kind of main tweak, right? But complex risk management programs have been in place for many years, and continue to move from strength to strength. I mean, do you agree, or am I like, does that make sense?
It makes sense. And at times, however, it can be the elephant in the room and cause drag for implementation of innovation. Having been in this role for a number of years and worked through the privacy, security, accessibility questions that these complex risk management organizations have, privacy, security tend to be the drag. And if you want a way to maintain the status quo, you raise privacy and security, and then the projects tend to stop. And there's been study after study to suggest that Canadian business invests pennies on the dollar on innovation than their counterparts in other peer regions. And that this lack of confidence is one way that they can stop that investment or stop things from going forward. And so it's important that we really lean in and help people understand and appreciate how these tools can help the privacy and security questions, and not let those privacy and security questions stall the innovation that's possible.
Yeah.
But Donna, just to also take a run at that question, absolutely, we've seen complex computer systems used in the financial services sector, including elements of artificial intelligence over a long period of time. What is causing the sort of excitement / fear is that we are seeing new capabilities. So the generative AI component of artificial intelligence, that notion that a computer system now can create something that can confuse us as to whether it was computer generated or human generated, is the reason we're talking about governance today, right? Like there are advances, and we've seen this from researchers and practitioners around the world, but certainly at home in our country, there's been a lot of really exciting innovation coming out of Canada, and a lot of great research and development that has been the fire under the sort of governance, I don't know what my analogy is, but anyway, it's like the driver of the governance and the regulatory environment. So we do have some distinct advancements that are both exciting but also cause pause. And so I don't want to sweep it under and say, well, it's been around since the 50s. Absolutely. But there have been major changes between what we had in the 50s and where we are today.
But wouldn't a AI governance program have an approval process now, right? Like, so it would already have an approval process. So if it was a high-end use case or had some generative capabilities, that would get caught at the governance level, a current governance framework, right? Because it would be considered to have material risk.
So I think it should be, but I would say that the more sophisticated AI usage is probably what you alluded to before in fraud, anti-money laundering space. And I don't believe a lot of consumers, even sometimes employees, understand that the banks have been using these sophisticated technologies for many years. I think the one difference here is that people are hearing things more about it now than they did before. Like the generative AI, ChatGPT, the number of users they got in a short period of time is front and center in industry and in the news. And then, a lot of financial institutions put out these nice releases about their investments into ChatGPT and how they'll be using it. So consumers are just hearing a lot about it more without understanding that you're probably already interacting with AI daily. You're probably unlocking your phone with your face. That's AI technology. That's something that's been around for many years. Now, I guess people may not understand that when they're doing that, they're interacting with AI. So now when they're hearing things like generative AI, some people may be scared of thinking, it's taking over the world or, taking away our jobs, but that's really not the case. And, a lot of these use cases have been around for a little bit of time. Now, to everyone's point, there are new risks that we have to consider. One risk that's always on my mind and that we talk about a lot is hallucinations, and the fact that generative AI specifically, can create responses which sound really legitimate, but in actuality, they're really not correct. There's been a few famous cases of that. Recently, I think Microsoft published the top 10 things to do in Ottawa. And one of the top things to do in Ottawa was to visit a food bank, and to come hungry and to visit a food bank. So it's very clear sometimes that there are some risks that, with generative AI that we still have to think through and understand how we remediate them and what controls we need to create.
So, Shawn, you did have to mention that. I thank you for sharing that. I'd like to make it clear, though, that there was a human in the loop with that one, right? And so human engagement is going to continue to be true on all of these tools. And how do we make sure that people are making the right decisions that these tools made? And let's be careful not to fall into the pitfall of anthropomorphizing these tools. This is a program. It's not a person. And so, they fabricate things. They can't hallucinate. They can't dream. So they do things like that. They reason over data. They're not thinking over things. So we need to make sure we have that characterization. I think, to both your points, we need to be clear-eyed around some of the risks and harms that can happen. Deep fakes are indeed an issue, but not all generative AI does deep fakes. Not all generative AI fabricates things. You have tools and levers that are there to be able to control the temperature of the response, or how much you ground your response on the actual data. We need to also make sure that experience that many of us have had using ChatGPT and feeling kind of, hey, this has now gone off track of where I wanted to go, is different than enterprise versions of generative AI. And it's different than other implementations. And so, again, definitions are so key as we go here. And double clicking on some of the salacious news articles to find out what's behind them. When we see Jeffrey Hinton or Yoshua Bengio out in the media, let's ask ourselves, what are they trying to accomplish? And they're trying to move change. They're trying to drive change. And so to drive change, sometimes you have to be provocative, and you go out to that extreme. I certainly would wish Jeffrey Hinton didn't regret his life's work, because he's done a lot of great things. It's just, hey, here's this little piece that we need to recognize. And the reason that I come back to that is, we've seen study after study after study that suggests that Canada lags the G7 in trust in AI. And there was just another one that came out recently from Toronto University, Metropolitan University, that suggests, again, that trust is low. And when they survey respondents and ask them if they can describe AI, there was one study that said only 4% of those surveyed could describe what AI was. And I've seen that firsthand as I talked to the carpenters or to the stylists and said, hey, how do you use AI for your business? And they say, I can't use AI for my business. I don't have data. I don't have the math skills. And then I ask about wayfinding applications or autocomplete, autocorrect translations. And as you said, Shawn, there's these uses that we've been so familiar with that, hey, we've gotten comfortable with those. And so, again, let's be very, very aware of the different definitions, and so that we can, drive in to reduce those harms where they might exist.
And I just want to add to that, if I may, that maturity in understanding when we have to have governance over the use of a technology is what is critical right now. So not only understand the definition and what the use cases are, and 100% go in at what the benefits are. Understand how, I've said this a million times before, for all my clients who say, okay, so we're starting to ask the question, should we use AI? And in my head, I'm like, okay, you're already a dinosaur. Like, the question is not should we, you've missed the picture here. The question is, what is the business problem we are trying to solve? Where do we have inefficiencies or overly manual processes, or we need greater insights, or we can envision new business models? Like, that's where you start to ask the question, where do we have things that aren't working optimally? And then you can start to think about, well, does AI help me solve that problem, and what would it look like to incorporate that technology? When you do that, so that's like phase one of maturity, which is the business case and the competitive advantage. And then once you do that, having an understanding of when governance kicks in. It's not applicable to the autocorrect. Okay, nobody's asking you to do an impact assessment on the autocorrect. We don't care. What we are worried about are when you have that downstream. It's a bigger, more riskier model. And as you said, so we've got some guidance already that exists. We're really trying to see, do we need to augment that guidance in financial services? But in the rest of the world, what we're worried about is, are we going to be using a model that is complex, that we do not understand, that will have implications for individuals? And we just haven't established the maturity to think through what those are. And that's where governance starts to take hold. So having a maturity not only of what are the benefits and why should we be and how should we be appropriately thinking through what types of systems we might want to incorporate, but then when does governance even kick in and what does it look like when it does? That's really critical.
Yeah, thank you, Carole. And what about specific controls? Like, has anybody dug into actually thinking through some of the controls that might need to be put in effect that are different than what we have today? Because there are
Absolutely. There's a wealth of additional controls that need to be considered. I think the first and foremost is around some of the safety and security of these tools. And so there's whole user groups and Reddit lists of people trying to jailbreak these tools. And so getting them to do things that they were never designed to do by creating fictitious loops or logic loops. And so want to make sure that you do that jailbreak prevention detection. You'll want to also do abuse detection and make sure that your conversational agent is working consistent with your expectations. And so that it doesn't become a foul-mouthed bigot or other things like that, that it's treating all communities that are in the mosaic of Canada the way that you would want to be treated. So you want to be able to look at those. You'll want to have an active oversight body to watch and monitor the prompting and make sure that the prompts are working correctly as expected, and that your fine tuning, if you do that, is having the right results. And this is a more active type of role than we've seen with some of the static AI models, where you generate a model and then you run that model until the next time you generate it and carry on. Here you have far more active engagement with the models and trying to determine, how it's moving along. Again, it's not for every type of deployment that you have. If you have something that's more conversational, where you have this interaction between an individual and your generative AI, you may have somebody that is continually providing that oversight, as opposed to where you have more of a natural language translation that remains somewhat static. You may only have periodic review of that. You'll want to look at across all the particular principles that your organization has established, or OECD principles. At Microsoft, we have installed 6 principles that guide all our work for responsible AI. And they include fairness, so making sure there's no bias and treating everybody properly, safety and reliability, making sure the results are consistent and safe, security and privacy, and making sure that you recognize the new security and privacy risks associated with AI. So traditional risks, and then looking at failure modes for AI, so that you can't do discerning of how your model was trained. Let's say you've trained it over anonymized personal information. There are set inclusion, set exclusion type attacks that you can run against AI. You need to protect against those. Making sure it's accessible. You want to have your entire community that's served by these tools. If you have a speech recognition tool set, then you want to make sure that for those people that speak a little slowly, perhaps have a stutter, that you allow them the time to complete their utterance and get that full thing out. And these are based then on 2 foundational principles of accountability, letting people know where AI is being used, giving them an opportunity for redress, and so putting those capabilities in place. And then lastly, transparency, letting people know that you're using these tools and how it's making decisions. Still a lot of debate over explainability that's often lumped into transparency. Do you need to go in and describe every step of the model, or can you take a medical trials type approach where you demonstrate that your AI has done the same thing a million times with the consistent results? And so that's an area to watch as well.
And I'd love to underscore one additional point from what John was saying, which is what we're seeing in financial services in terms of requests for greater assistance has to do with better training when it comes to data ethics. So actually democratizing some of that training and ensuring that there is an AI governance / data ethics. It shows up in different ways. oversight team, to John's point, that is competent. So they're properly trained, they understand what they're looking for, and that is multidisciplinary or cross-functional. It cannot just be owned by one group, but actually you may have an owner, but you will have your teammates from a number of different groups sitting there, and that it's actually delivering on something. So really clear terms of reference so that you are delivering on something, and that you've got that senior level buy-in that will hold that group accountable. Those are some of the additions that we're seeing, particularly in financial services.
And I want to maybe touch a little bit on controls. And I think those are all really good comments, but I guess it's very much user case specific, right? Like if you're using AI to predict which light in the building is going to go out first, like we probably don't care if we can't explain or it's not fair to the light bulbs. That's an important topic. Like not everything in AI, not everything in generative AI requires fairness reviews or explainability reviews. If we're impacting our customers, then absolutely we need to review and confirm what we're doing and be able to explain it. If we're predicting whether or not the light bulb is going to go down, like that's really probably not a case that we need to spend a lot of time on determining explainability or fairness. Now, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Like like we're going to be able to know that our light bulbs are going out and the system's not predicting it. But we shouldn't be spending a lot of time and emphasis on trying to create explainability and fairness frameworks for things that don't impact the customers.
I think that's a really important point, because at the end of the day, what are you trying to do? You're trying to make sure you have that trust with your end client, and so that is really important. So that explainability element becomes very important. But it also makes me think, we've been talking a lot about use cases, like, and the use cases of application within a bank. Are we going to do it, or are we not going to do it? But the other element that changes here is the threat landscape massively changes, like the actual threats to the financial service organization because of generative AI. And that's a topic for another day. But to me, there's sort of okay, should we not do this use case? Yes, no. But there's also, okay, how has our threat landscape changed? And how can we, how have these threat actors changed? How are we protecting our organization? And then finally, like, how are we educating our consumers? And I see this as a really important element, because if you have to have, the consumers have to be bought in, going back to John's point, bought into using the use case for it to be effective, to generate revenue, for it to be productive, right? So education seems to me is a really important element that the industry needs to resolve. We're running out of time. I will just emphasize to the audience, if you have any questions, just put up your hand now. But if I can just finalize with the two speakers, in your perspective, for wider adoption and acceptance of generative AI in Canada, what do we need to be doing as an industry in order to make it more acceptable, make more use of it, ensure that we're protecting our organizations and our financial system?
I'll jump in first to give someone else the last word, I guess. But I think it's a matter of establishing or reestablishing trust in these tool sets and ensuring that people have an appreciation for how these tools can help streamline their businesses. I was talking with an insurer in Canada that was looking at using AI for claims adjudication and getting claims done faster. And there was a perception that they would use AI as an oracle over all claims that were coming in. And what they decided to do was use AI for the 10% of the claims that were silly simple. And be able to streamline and accelerate that work. And the thought was that the next year it would be 12%, the next year it would be 15%, that they would grow that capacity as they got comfortable with it, as their constituents got comfortable with it, to grow it out. And so I think that's important. I think also one last piece on trust, because you mentioned the risks associated with generative AI. We have not seen an increase in the threat actor activity using AI at this point. There is some researchers that suggest that there's going to be better ransomware created or different content that's created. We're not seeing that in the marketplace today, but we do need to be aware that these tools may be used for that going forward. And so let's be alert, but let's not overstate what's happening out there in the marketplace.
Thank you, John. John, final remarks. Okay.
Go ahead, Shawn.
I was just going to echo what John said. I think trust is the key component, and having consumers build trust around it. It's also a matter of time before, you know, these technologies become more and more involved in our everyday lives, and we're probably not going to think twice about them. But it's really a matter of time. Just like, you know, when the internet first came out, or when things develop at first, it seems scary. And of course, when people think of AI, they think of Terminator. You know, not not a system that identifies fraud on your credit card. But yeah, trust, I think, is a key priority, and that's the most important item.
And then I'll close off in a similar way, but also drawing from a point that John made earlier, which is, you know, my hope is that we will move fast, but don't break anything, right? Like, we actually have to move to adoption and start using more, especially in Canada. We need to get a little bit more innovative with our systems. We can't wait for all the T's and all the T's crossed and I's dotted. It's in the law, because it's going to take time, and we already know what guardrails need to be put in place to protect against some of those easier use cases that we're talking about. So the thing is that once we start using a technology that really does do what we say AI will do, it adds huge value. And so that becomes something that is very attractive, and in and of itself builds trust, because you're actually using it. You're not just hearing about it, but you're using it. So moving forward with a strong innovation agenda will only help Canadian enterprise and Canadian financial services, but doing so in a responsible manner. And we have enough guidance right now to know what that looks like.
Perfect. Thank you, Carole. The perfect way to end. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and for our panelists for your contributions. We actually will have a new website in the next couple weeks. There will be snippets from this website, from this webinar on the website, but actually full replays will be available to members. So if you have interest, let us know. And thanks again for the contributions that all of you have made today. I really appreciate it. It was a fantastic discussion and lots of food for thought for everybody.